Have you ever stopped to think about how a society completely transforms itself? Going from quiet farming villages to these massive, bustling modern cities? Well, that huge shift is exactly what we're diving into today. It's all part of something called modernization theory, which is really just a way to understand how nations change over time.
So it all really comes down to this one big question. How does a country actually become modern? Is there some kind of universal roadmap that every nation follows? Before we can even start to unpack that, we need to get on the same page about what modernization even means.
Okay, so let's lock in our core definition. Modernization isn't just about getting shiny new buildings and high-speed internet. It's way deeper than that. Think of it as a fundamental rewiring of an entire society. It changes the economy, the politics, and even the way people interact with each other as they move from a farming-based past to an industrial future.
Right. So if that's the destination, what does the journey actually look like? A really great place to start is with the work of a theorist named C.E. Black. He came up with this idea that it doesn't matter what country you're talking about, every single one has to face four fundamental challenges to modernize.
And what's so interesting about Black's idea is that he didn't just see these as isolated problems. He saw them as a sequence, like a series of hurdles. A society has to clear each one to keep moving forward. So let's walk through them one by one.
First up, you've got the challenge. This is that initial shock to the system. It's the moment a traditional society first bumps up against modern ideas, modern technology, you name it. All of a sudden, the old way of doing things just doesn't cut it anymore, and the choice becomes pretty stark: adapt or get left behind.
Okay, so once it's obvious that change has to happen, what's next? Well, usually a power struggle. This brings us to the second stage, leadership consolidation. Who is actually going to steer the ship through these stormy waters? This whole phase is about hammering out a stable, unified government that has both the power and the vision to lead the country through all this chaos.
And then we get to the transformation itself, and believe me, this is the heavy lifting. We're talking about a tectonic shift. The entire economy pivots from farming to industry. People start moving from small villages into big cities. Social rules that have existed for centuries get completely rewritten. It is messy and it is absolutely profound.
And finally, after all that upheaval, a society hits the challenge of integration. I mean, how do you hold everything together? This is all about creating a new national identity that can unite people from different ethnic groups, different religions, and different social classes into one cohesive nation. It's a huge task.
So if those are the big universal problems that everyone faces, what do the solutions look like? How do new governments actually set themselves up to handle all this change? Answering that question brings us to another major thinker in this field, Edward Shils.
Shils was really fascinated by the different political paths a nation could go down. He mapped out a whole spectrum of options, and this quote really captures the ideal outcome on one end of that spectrum, a true political democracy, where the people have the final say and can hold their leaders accountable.
At the end of the day, he basically sorted all the political options into two big buckets. On one side, you have your democratic models, which are all about representation and individual freedoms. And on the other side, you've got your oligarchic models, where all the power is concentrated in the hands of a small, elite group.
But Shils knew it wasn't just a simple either-or. He added a lot of nuance. For instance, within democracy, he described a tutelary version, where you have a strong leader who kind of guides the whole process. And on the flip side, an oligarchy could be a modernizing one, like a military government pushing for economic growth, or it could be totalitarian, trying to control every single aspect of life.
Now, Black and Shils gave us some incredibly powerful frameworks to work with, but they definitely weren't the only ones thinking about these big questions. So let's bring a few other key figures into the conversation and see what they add to the picture.
So you've got a guy like Seymour Martin Lipset. For him, it really came down to the economy. He made the case that things like national wealth and education were basically the building blocks you needed for democracy to even have a chance. But then someone like Karl Deutsch comes along and says, hold on, the real story is social. He focused on what he called social mobilization, this huge shift in how people live, work, and talk to each other, which he saw as the true engine of change.
Then you have Shmuel Eisenstadt, who kind of threw a cold dose of reality on the whole thing. He's famous for his idea of political breakdown. And his point was simple but crucial. This whole modernization thing is not a guaranteed success. He warned that if society changes too fast for its political institutions to handle, the whole project can just fall apart and lead to chaos. And this idea that things can go terribly wrong leads us perfectly to Leonard Binder. He really pushed back against any theory that claimed to have a one-size-fits-all answer. He argued that every single nation faces its own unique set of crises and sequences. For Binder, it was the specific order in which a country tackled its problems that shaped its destiny, meaning there is no single blueprint for becoming modern.
Okay, so we've got universal problems, a whole spectrum of political options, and some pretty serious warnings about how it can all go wrong. It's a lot to take in. How do we make sense of all these different, sometimes competing, ideas? Let's try to zoom out and put the puzzle pieces together.
One helpful way to organize all this is to group the theories into three big approaches. First is the historical model, which sees modernization as one long, continuous story. Then you have the typological model, like what Shils was doing, which likes to create clear categories, like traditional versus modern. And finally, there's the evolutionary model, which views it all as a process where societies are constantly adapting to solve new problems as they arise.
All of this leaves us with one last, really important question. I mean, these theories were developed to make sense of the huge changes from past centuries. But what about right now? In our world of nonstop digital disruption and global interconnectedness, what does it even mean to be modern anymore? Is that journey ever really finished?